jackets. I want to give the microphone for a minute. Hey guys, please give me a moment. There's a lot of, it's really wonderful to have this gathering, and this is what it's about, is being together and not feeling alone. So we really appreciate everyone being part of this community. But also, we want to make sure that this kind of conversations don't just die off the minute you leave. So the idea is not to go home and just feel bad that things are going so horribly bad, but actually do something about it. Whether you're going to donate to a candidate, whether you're going to make phone calls, whether you're going to call your congressperson. Even if you live in DC, we don't have our own particular senators, and we have one congressperson that shouldn't be there at this point because she's been there too long. But aside from that, and I like Eleanor, don't get me wrong here, but beside that, we need to have voices. So call your Maryland senators, call your Virginia senators, and tell them you're from DC and you don't have representation, but they're our representative. Actually, in reality, all of the congresspeople and all of the senators are our representatives. So we have the right to call all of them and tell them about Washington, DC, why we need statehood and why we're calling them today.
I'll say something if you want.
So I have with me here one of the most dogged activists, Mehdi Benjamin. How many of you? Obviously, a lot of you have heard of Mehdi. She's there every single day, literally, and harassing the members of Congress and reminding them about the genocide and the horrors that are happening in Gaza, in Iran, in Yemen, in Sudan, in the Congo, wherever it may be. Nobel Peace Prize is better deserved here. But I want to give her the microphone to tell you a few things that are going on. So please give her your full attention. You didn't give it to me, but give it to her, please.
So raise your hand if you've heard of a horrible, horrible organization called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Boo! So Rashida Tlaib, we were just with her about a half hour ago. She has a fabulous letter condemning the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and saying that we should not support that at all, and U.S. money should go back to the UN agencies. Do you agree? So only 4 other members of Congress have signed that letter so far. Woo! And we need by the end of Thursday to get a whole bunch of members of Congress. So please call your member and say sign on to Rashida Tlaib's letter about the Gaza, quote, Humanitarian Foundation. Clear? Okay, one other thing. This, quote, ceasefire in Iran. Did you talk, Andy, about that? Yeah, you did.
The performative ceasefire? Yes, I did.
So the War Powers resolution in the Senate will be voted on by the end of this week. It might be tomorrow, it might be Thursday, it might be Friday. So we need as many senators as possible. Now it's kind of funny that Senator Schumer is supporting it, which makes you think, what's wrong with it? But he's supporting it because it's anti-Trump. And that's how politics goes in the Congress. But it is a good War Powers Act to say Congress has to authorize intervention in Iran. So that's another one. We need your help to call as many senators as you can and tell them to support Tim Kaine's resolution. And we, as Code Pink, raise your hand if you've been with us in Congress. So big hand, thank you to those who come with us. Tomorrow we will be at the Senate side pushing that resolution. 10 o'clock, Dirksen Cafeteria, Anybody who can, come for as little or as much time as you can, and we will push hard for more senators to support that very important resolution. You can reach us, Code Pink, any day in Congress. You can go online to our website, go to the events page, and you'll see whether we're meeting at the House side or the Senate side. But we need you. We have a good time there. We have great people, and it makes you feel a lot better about the world to be doing something. So thank you.
Not now. I think we're going to do that another time. Yeah, that's a different time. All right, hello? All right, we're waiting to get started. We'll be starting in just a couple of minutes. While we're waiting again for Mehdi to arrive and a couple of other people to arrive, how many of you have retweeted Marjorie Taylor Greene lately? It's interesting, right? Exactly. We have some hands here in the front. It's fascinating. She's speaking actually about ending wars and not having intervention and checking Israel and all of that stuff. It's fascinating. I've been listening also to Tucker Carlson, I'm sorry to say. Whoa, we have a fan base. I had no idea in this room. But yeah, I mean, he's been speaking a lot, speaking truth to power, which is really fascinating. And one thing about Tucker and Marjorie is actually they have Trump's ears. And that's important. That's important. All right, we'll be starting in about maybe 5 minutes. So get all the talking out, talk to each other, introduce yourself to someone you're sitting next to. And then we'll, once we start, I'm going to ask you to be completely quiet at that point. Thank you. Okay. All right, beautiful. Hello, everyone. Can we have your attention for 1 second, please? This is rather important. So we are trying to adjust the sound so everyone can hear it wherever you're sitting. So bear with us for a moment so that we can make the adjustments for the sound. So we could, I'm going to ask you to raise your hands in a minute, whether you're hearing it well or not. Are all the microphones the same? They're all the same. All right. I want to hear, if everybody can be quiet for a minute, we can make this easy. Thank you. See, it got even cooler. So hold up a minute for a second. Think cool, cool, it's cool. Okay, quiet please. Quiet please. Because we want to test the sound. Over there in the middle, somewhere in there, do you hear me okay? I got thumbs up. Thumbs up, all right, everywhere. On this side, do you hear me okay? Thumbs up. The back room, do you hear me okay? Major thumbs up. All right, I think we got the sound well. Anyone, any complaints about sound? Everybody's good. I know there's complaints about the AC. I apologize. We're trying to figure it out. Hopefully we'll figure it out very, very soon. It's working about 42% at this point. Thank you. Exactly. We have the outside to compare ourselves to, so it's not too bad.
Hi, how are you? How are you? I'm good. Thank you, water. Huh? I know. You need to be, you're like me. I don't do well at somebody else's party. I want to do the party.
Test, 1, 2, test. This one is low. This one is low.
That's the second one. Where are you going to go? I'm going to go to the side.
Test. Hello, testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. That's good. Testing 1, 2, 3. So our guest has arrived. Mehdi Hasan is here, so please give a big hand. So Mehdi, I was telling them today, let me sit over here. I was telling them today, you texted me earlier about the air conditioning. And the air conditioning was working 120% this morning. I came in at noon and it was actually chilly. At 3:30, it was so cold, I said, please turn it up, it's too cold. By 4 o'clock, the units went out. And it's unfortunate, but we're working to try to fix them as we are moving forward. But I'm going to, how many of you have heard of Zeteo? How many of you are subscribers? How many of you are lying? Yeah. So if you're not a subscriber, this is your chance to do it because it really is about the media. This is a lot about the media. As you know, the president we have and all the members of Congress, they listen to the media. They don't always listen to people, but they always try to listen to the media. And the media can go one way or the other. That's why we need independent journalism. That's why we need people like Mehdi Hasan to make sure that we are getting an unfiltered version of the truth and not the garbage that we're being fed by the mainstream stuff that we have thrown at us every single day. And if any of you have had a chance to listen, yes, he deserves applause. If any of you have had a chance to listen, once in a while I'll go on Fox News and just watch Fox News for a few moments. And then I have to take a shower afterwards because the type of reporting they give, the lies, the outright lies. I mean, there are things that are maybe great, but the stuff that they give you that is outright lies is ridiculous. And I have to go back, and the shower that I get, the cleansing that I get is by listening to Zeteo and media like that. That's what gives us really the fortitude and the power to keep moving forward. Otherwise, we're all shut down. So please continue to support independent media and particularly Mehdi Hasan Zeteo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. Give it up for Andy Shalal and Busboys. Give it up for Busboys' one working AC unit. And inshallah, the other one works by the time a member of Congress gets here. Although, as my friend Bassem Youssef says, inshallah means that ain't gonna happen. Thank you all for joining me. Can you hear me? Can I hear you? Hello? Yes. Thank you to our nation's founder for building the nation's capital on a swamp so we can sit here in the heat in June. Thank you for joining us. I was worried that no one would show up because there's a heat wave advisory out. But unfortunately, we live in what the fake Chinese proverb calls interesting times, where every day something crazy is going on. So I came here last week. I was thinking of doing an event on Gaza, and here we are doing an event on Iran, but we're also going to talk about Gaza. Because we are in the middle of yet another war abroad. I don't know, we're going to talk, is there a ceasefire, not a ceasefire? What time of day is it? Maybe there is a ceasefire. What hour of the day it is? There is much to discuss. In about 30 minutes, we're going to talk to California Congressman Ro Khanna, who's been leading the charge to restrain the president's war-making powers. He'll be here to talk to us about his efforts in Congress. But before that, I thought it would be important for us to try and understand what Iran is doing and what Iranians are thinking, because in this country, as Andy pointed out, we often talk about foreign countries either as they don't exist or as a caricature or as something we saw a Hollywood villain say or do. And it's worth actually thinking about why other countries and other governments and other peoples act in different ways and have different interests, priorities, reactions. Also, I should add, more than 600 people have been killed in Iran over the last less than 2 weeks. I think less than 30 in Israel, over 600 in Iran, several thousand injured. This is a real human tragedy, not just a geopolitical board game. So without any further ado, my guests today are Nigar Mortazavi and Sima Tusi.
Can you start in a second again? And let's keep it really quiet. People are complaining on the video they can't hear.
So what should I do?
Good. Too quiet. Now it's quiet.
I'm being told to eat quietly so people at home on the live stream can hear. I'm going to speak a bit louder. Hopefully everyone can hear everywhere. I'll speak loudly. I'm known for speaking loudly. But we have Sina Tusi, Negar Motazavi, both of you, I believe, at the Center for International Policy in one shape or form, both analysts on Iran. Negar hosts the Iran podcast. I'm just going to open with a very straightforward question for you both. Several hundred people killed in Iran. I'm guessing both of you have friends or family still in Iran. What is the reaction in Iran?
Well, it first started with the first Israeli attack. Everyone I spoke to on the ground woke up in the middle of the night in shock and horror. Ground shaking, hearing explosions, jets flying overhead, and it really came out of the blue. Nobody expected that Israeli attack to happen on that night, as U.S. and Iran had nuclear talks scheduled for just 2 days after that, last Sunday. And a sense of also confusion is what I heard from a lot of people, not knowing what's happening, how long it's going to go for, not having so much information. The government also was caught off guard, not so much defense, at least air defense, at least on the first day. And then we started hearing the reports of damage and all of that. And throughout the course of the past 10 days, you know, the war has escalated, as you said, over 600 killed, the health ministry just said, 5,000 injured, and many, many displaced also, with the orders of the evacuation that the Israeli army is putting out on social media, usually middle of the night. One day, Donald Trump tweeted that everyone should immediately leave Tehran. This is a city, a metropolis of 10 million people, more than the entire country of Israel. You know, women, children, elderly, disabled, where are they supposed to go in the middle of the night? I know family members, friends who tried to leave the city had to wait in gas station lines for hours just to fill up a tank and then drive for hours to get to towns and cities outside Tehran. And this is the lucky few who have somewhere else to go. Some are even trying to flee the country. The airspace has been closed since then, but through land borders, there's sort of a flow of people going to neighboring countries. So absolute shock and horror. I would say what it brought was, I don't want to call it a rally around the flag necessarily for the government, but a sense of unity and this opposition to an attack on the homeland, on not just the sovereignty of the country, but also on people's homes. Civilians have been killed, targeted homes, car bombs going off on the street in the name of these assassinations. And the targets were not just the nuclear program or military and political targets.
Sina, I wonder about the preparedness of the Iranian people for this attack, not just because we're reading in the papers that Donald Trump was tweeting about it and the US military were worried that he was giving away this element of surprise because he's got such a big mouth. But this has been going on for years. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu has been wanting to bomb Iran since the Backstreet Boys were top of the charts, since like the mid-late 1990s. How prepared were the Iranian public for this? Has there been a sense of resignation that at some point the United States is going to bomb us?
Yeah, so Iran has been under basically U.S. siege for over 4 decades. And this war has long been in the making. We know that the neocons who launched the Iraq war, the real goal was, you know, in the war on terror to transform the Middle East for arguably for Israel and U.S. strategic interests to dominate the region, to regime change all these governments that don't kind of reflexively toe the U.S. and Israeli line. And so the Iranian people in this context have been under a barrage of economic pressure. There's been an information war as well. And this is obviously a lopsided war where we just basically saw 2 nuclear weapon powers attack a non-nuclear power that they've been besieging for years. Europe also helped them a lot. So Iran was really alone. It didn't really get tangible assistance from any other parties. And so in this context, I mean, the Iranian people and this kind of rally around the country and what the national solidarity we saw was I think, something that really shook and surprised Netanyahu, that I don't think this is what he expected. I think to a large degree, they believed in their own propaganda, that we're going to bomb a few spots, and all it takes is another push, and the people are going to pour into the streets and like topple the regime, and so that didn't happen. Iran has been a very polarized society, especially in recent years. There is definitely deep-seated discontent against the political status quo, against the government there. But at the same time, when it comes to Iran and the country itself, the national identity, its territorial integrity, that most Iranians distinguish between that, and they don't see Netanyahu or Israel or the U.S. as their savior. And so we saw this really unprecedented. I was really struck by how much the people really rallied, and there wasn't any unrest or protest or this kind of scenario that Netanyahu and them hoped for.
Nega, Sina mentioned seeing the Israelis or Americans as saviors. Every time we bomb a country in the Middle East, people pop up on American television to say, we're saving the women. This is to liberate the women. Are Iranian women being saved over the last couple of weeks?
Well, they've been killed. The woman life freedom slogan that was an organic, it still is, movement to opposition to, the repressive internal dynamic is something that Netanyahu tried to champion back then. But I guess we're taking out the life part of it, woman freedom, but no life. Yeah, so freedom bombs coming from the sky onto people's homes, taking a civilian toll. As I said, car bombs going off on the street, attacking ambulances. Aid workers have been killed. Still the information is not very up to date and accurate. I think we're going to hear even more and more of the horror stories about it because reporting on the ground is also not as much as needed. But no, we didn't see, as Sina said, sort of that rallying against the flag that they expected. At some point, even the state TV was hacked, and this message was put out on Iranian state TV, of how bad their government is, and it's time for the people to rise up and sort of overthrow. But I guess when you're fleeing your home and your city from bombs that are falling on you, there's no point of mobilizing and sort of rioting. So, and just to add to Sina's point, yes, opposition and dissent exists in the country, as we've seen protest after protest, but it doesn't mean that this form of a foreign attack in the form of aerial bombardments is going to sort of bring freedom or better governance or democracy or a brighter future to the people. And as far as I think the sort of crack within the system is also something that maybe the Israelis had expected, and we haven't really seen that happen. Just this week, an audio was leaked by Israeli intelligence services calling Iranian top officials, asking them to put out videos against the regime and threatening their families and children. And no video surfaced, which shows that sort of that assumption that this regime is about to fall and crack, and we just need one push or a few of the freedom bombs is just going to do it. It didn't happen.
It's interesting that for 21 months, I've been on TV, radio, podcast, debating supporters of Israel saying, how dare you suggest that we would kill children in Gaza? And now we have audio of Israeli intelligence agents saying, we're going to kill your kids if you don't do as we say, which is interesting, quiet part loud. Sina, this is a country that is spoken about in some of the most Orientalist terms in the Western media. There's always a reference to bazaars and haggling and ancient civilization. There's always a reference to Khomeini when they mean Khamenei. There's a lot of ignorance and tropes, right? And it must frustrate you as someone who understands it better than most. Tell the crowd here, what are American analysts and pundits, the people they see when they switch on MSNBC or CNN or Fox? Andy called it Fox News. I refuse to call it news. But what are they missing? What do you think people here need to know that they're missing when they watch the nightly news about Iran and about Iranian policymaking, for example?
Yeah, very, very important question. Thanks for that. In general, the view that's given by the mainstream narrative about Iran or any adversary nation is a very simplistic, black and white view that portrays things in, good or evil light, right? So Iran is demonized, Iranians are demonized, they've been demonized for decades, they're the bad guy, they're the ones who don't want peace. I mean, the reality is obviously much more complex than that. And Iran, you know, I really view this moment still in kind of like post-colonial lens, where we really are still in the tail end of this period of European and colonization and American global dominance. And Iran was, in the past couple centuries, was like many other countries, most other countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, were subjected to, you know, colonial conquest, interference, various machinations to take over its resources. And so you've had this period in Iranian history, not unlike Chinese history as well, like a couple centuries of humiliation, territorial loss, governments collapsing, foreign coup d'etats. And in this context, in the past century, I think what's most important for a general American public to know is that Iran has had grassroots movements for constitutional republic. And these movements started and gained ground before they even started in many European countries in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And, you know, Iran's, for example, their constitutional revolution was eventually crushed by Russian and British interference. But so Iran has basically had this quest for more representative constitutional governance for over a century, but also more independence and coming out of this kind of colonial yoke. So I really view what's happening ultimately in the grand strategic picture as Iran, among other countries, kind of wresting their way out of this kind of period of foreign domination and Western domination. And this war, I think, is really at the root of it. It's not about the nuclear program. It's not about the weapons, you know, the missile program in Iran, but it's that the U.S. and Israel do not want any country, much less a strategically heavyweight country like Iran. It's a big, you know, country with a lot of people, to kind of not be in their sphere of influence, and not go along with their aims for the region, which is an expansionist Israel, consolidating a apartheid order in Israel, and kind of having this fortress Israel rule over a lot of impoverished people and chaotic kind of countries and or pliant dictators. So Iran has really, you know, been kind of in opposition to these kind of hegemonic aims, I would argue, and that is really at the root of this conflict. And it's a situation that is unsustainable, I would argue, for the U.S. to want to now go to a big war with Iran, and I think that's part of why we had the ceasefire, but we can get into that later.
Can I just add something? Yeah, to that, I agree with all of that history and big picture, but even if we look at the sort of zoom in the small picture right now, I think the coverage is such a disservice to the audiences. I mean, from day one, the Israeli strikes were, of course, by the Israelis called preemptive strikes. And the media just started repeating that. Preemptive strike has international legal connotation. It means your enemy was about to attack you, you figured it out, and you went for the attack first. And the Israelis haven't produced evidence for why this was a preemptive strike on Iran or the civilian casualty. From day one, the media refused, or at least Western, US, global media, mainstream legacy media, wouldn't cover the civilian costs of it. They would try to portray this as just a bunch of targets, very targeted nuclear sites, maybe a few scientists and military figures. But I think it's just such a disservice. And if you talk maybe not to this audience, but if you speak to an average American audience and ask them what is the one country in the Middle East that actually has nuclear weapons, a lot of them tend to say it's Iran, whereas it's Israel. So just because the Israelis have an undeclared nuclear weapons program doesn't mean it doesn't have to be reported also in the media.
There was a poll a few years ago, I always cite this one, that American public were asked in a poll, do you support the bombing of Agrabah from Aladdin? And a big chunk of Americans said, yes, bomb Agrabah, which tells you about how we deal with both geopolitics and Middle East geography in this country. Sina, talk to me about Ayatollah Khamenei. Number one, where is he? Number two, is he about to lose power? The Economist has a fascinating piece saying that the power is shifting towards a lot of the military, IRGC, who are actually way more kind of up for a fight than he is. And my third question about Khamenei is, a lot of people don't know this, but he is a religious Ayatollah, a religious leader to a lot of Shia Muslims, and he actually put out a fatwa, didn't he, about 10, 15 years ago, saying it's haram, it's forbidden to have nuclear weapons. I wonder if that fatwa is going to change after the events of the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, so it's very interesting on this issue of kind of weapons of mass destruction in Iran. Actually, going back to the 80s when Iran was a victim of chemical weapons attacks from Saddam Hussein's Iraq during the Iran War, that Iran didn't reciprocate in kind because of similar restrictions back then from Ayatollah Khomeini, who's the founder of the Islamic Republic. But Khamenei, he's, I would argue that when it comes to his approach to foreign policy, it has been pretty consistent and arguably predictable, which is maybe why things have gotten to this situation. Because he had this policy of basically using the nuclear program as a bargaining chip, you know, not going for the bomb, but also not wanting to kind of give it up entirely. Basically wanting concessions and wanting
to be a threshold state.
Yeah, to be no, but also I think, you know, what the JCPOA reflected was the great powers in America giving the Islamic Republic a higher degree of recognition and bringing this kind of revolutionary states more into the global order. And I think that recognition is something that Khamenei has wanted. You know, Iran has pursued détente with the U.S. multiple times in the 80s during the Iran-Contra, in the 90s under Hashemi Rafsanjani, under Khatami,
after the Iraq invasion in 2003.
Yeah, after the Iraq invasion, after you know, obviously during Rouhani. So I think, you know, and Khamenei had green-lighted all of this stuff. So in his vision, I think, you know, there is, you know, he wants some kind of strategic settlements with the U.S. arguably. I mean, many people wouldn't argue this, but I think the history bears this out, but not like a client-patron relationship, not like what existed under the Shah. I think, you know, because for Iran, these sanctions, the situation that has been inflicted on it is very costly, that it can't develop the way it wants to. It can't even trade with Russia and China because of U.S. secondary sanctions to the extent that it would want, or its neighboring countries. So this desire for a nuclear deal has been there. It was there with the JCPOA.
Is it still there, or does it die with him?
So that's the key question. So as you say, there's greater outcry even within the system to build the bomb, criticism that why didn't Iran build the bomb previously, that it kind of fell for this ruse of negotiations, which is unclear if Trump's negotiations were a ruse or not. But regardless, I think, you know, getting a deal is going to be much harder, and those people within Iran making an argument for giving up the nuclear program are going to have a much harder time to do that unless the U.S. is able to offer more, which I'm skeptical of, but I think it would hinge on that.
Nega, the reaction from Iran, the bombing of the airbase in Qatar, which was coordinated, we're told, with the Qataris, no Americans were killed, no Qataris were killed. Is that Iran showing restraint? Is that Iran being weak? You know, after Qasem Soleimani was killed by Trump in his first term, they fired rockets at an American airbase, gave some soldiers some head injuries, brain injuries, but didn't kill anyone. Is what we've learned in recent months that actually Iran and its quote-unquote proxies that we always hear about, Hezbollah, were much weaker than we were told? Were you surprised at the quote-unquote weakness of Iran that's being talked about? Because the Republicans are loving it.
Well, I think, yes, they are weakened, and of course, Iran has always been the underdog, but to assume they're powerless, I think, is incorrect. You know, nobody thought that Iraq and Afghanistan would take 20 years. It was supposed to be a few weeks and we're out, and, you know, the U.S. got bogged down. Essentially, in Afghanistan, returned the key back to the Taliban after 20 years and left. So, you know, to think that you can just go into someone else's country, homeland, with this strong sense of nationalism, patriotism, sovereignty, there's a central government, you know, there's a working system. Yes, there's a lot of criticism. We're both critics of a lot of the internal dynamics, political, economic, social, but to think that they're absolutely powerless and going to go away or fall with a few bombs or just 10 days of attacks, or that they can't put up a fight to defend themselves, I think it's also proven to be false. And as you said, the retaliation against the U.S. was basically Iran. They only had bad options. They didn't have any good options. Not responding would mean weakness, paper tiger, and bring more attacks. And responding to escalate could invite also more attacks. So they had to calibrate it somewhere that wouldn't cross the U.S. red line of a fatal attack, but also show or establish some deterrence.
Quick question. I want to go to the audience. Do you think Iran is now going to go for a bomb?
I don't know, but if they do, we can thank these attacks of Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump for it, because they have threatened that at least they would pull out of this international safeguard NPT system and its potential for a more clandestine underground program.
I think there was a vote in the Iranian parliament to suspend cooperation with the IAEA. Sina, do they go? Is it more likely or less likely now they go for a bomb?
I think the short-term steps, there will be several steps before that, like they might go to 90% enriched uranium, they might withdraw from the NPT, basically to increase their leverage and see what they can get diplomatically. But overall, the atmosphere is one that's pushing Iran towards a bomb.
How can they go to 90% enriched uranium when Trump destroyed all the uranium? Oh, no, he didn't. Let's take some questions from the audience. We're going to continue part 2 of this discussion with Congressman Ro Khanna shortly, but I do want to give you an opportunity to ask Negar and Sina some questions. Do we have a spare mic? Or are we using one of these mics? JP, do we know? Before we go.
Hello? Hello?
Okay. Should we go to the lady there in the middle? Yes. Do you want to stand up and the mic will come to you?
Thank you. Since we're on the topic of Iran, what would make Iran or the people in Iran hesitate in getting a nuclear weapon? It seems like, well, certainly Israel has nuclear capabilities. Also, I believe when Russia attacked Ukraine, one of the regrets is that perhaps if they had more, armaments, it would have served as a deterrent. But since we are where we are right now with Iran and everything that's happened in the last 2 weeks, what would make Iran say, no, I don't want a nuclear weapon? It's hard to imagine.
Sina, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so I think the cost-benefit analysis for Iran and actually dashing towards a bomb has been basically the North Korea model versus this idea of getting sanctions relief, kind of including some kind of security guarantees through a UN Security Council resolution that the Obama-era nuclear deal had. Because, if Iran were to build the bomb, it would potentially also isolate it from countries that it is dealing with right now. Even China and Russia haven't wanted Iran to build the bomb. It's unclear if that may change. I think Israel's attack gives Iran more justification, both domestically and internationally, to build the bomb. But traditionally, the costs were viewed as outweighing the benefits. And I would argue, it was more of a negotiating tactic and a bargaining chip to get U.S. sanctions and international sanctions removed.
Okay, should we take some more questions? We've got time for a few more questions. Lady in the front and then the gentleman there. Let's take 2 at a time, shall we? This lady and then the gentleman there with the beard behind.
Hello. My question is that after obviously the U.S. got involved, Iran proceeded to bomb the U.S. bases in Qatar. Despite Qatar being such a strong, geopolitical ally for Iran for so long, and Qatar has also said that they have the right to retaliate. Was it worth it of a decision for Iran to kind of put such relationships within the region at such stake at this point in time when Israel is not kind of caring about whatever Donald Trump is saying about the performative ceasefire? Was it worth at this point in time, despite the options being worse?
Okay, and then that gentleman there who had his hand up, you want to put your hand up again? Yes, there, right there.
The United States, in my lifetime at least, only attacks weak countries. It's a 100% record of attacking weak countries for the last 40, 50 years. And I think Iran, it would appear, became a weak country recently in the eyes of Israel and the United States. And I wonder, it's, I guess, too big a question to ask how that happened, but I'll ask instead, do you think it's seen that way by the people in charge, that they made terrible mistakes there? They let their missile defense get degraded, their air defense get degraded. They let their missile supply, which we hear a lot about, was, I think, insufficient to scare off the Israelis and insufficiently accurate. So, and of course, they don't have a nuke. So, I mean, it connects to the last question, or 2 questions ago. But do you think it's seen that way, that this is, we made terrible mistakes being weak?
It's interesting you mentioned weakness. Michael Ledeen, the neoconservative scholar, if we could call him that, who passed away recently, there's a quote attributed to him. He says, every few years, the United States should take a small, crappy little country and throw it against the wall to show the world we mean business, which is basically U.S. foreign policy, especially under the right. Do you want to deal with that question first about weakness, and then we'll take the
Yeah, I can kind of, actually, they're kind of related. I'll give my quick, I think, when it came to this war, Iran had to go to pretty high levels of escalation. So it shot, large missile barrages towards Israel. Initially, in the first couple days, it was like 150, 100 missiles. And then it got less as the conflict kind of wore on. But interestingly, I've seen these compelling assessments that the number of hits actually went up. And I think, when it comes to measuring Iran's weakness or not, I think if this war, if it was going as well as a lot of the Israeli government's kind of claims said, or kind of the mainstream media claims, they wouldn't have ended it in 12 days. The U.S. wouldn't have. I mean, there's a lot of footage out there of Iranian missiles hitting key sites in Israel. I actually heard from a Wall Street Journal reporter who said that he talked to Israeli officials who said that the Iranian missiles have hit key intelligence and military sites, and the Israelis are kind of reeling and they want more U.S. support. But anyways, the Iranian approach was to drain the interceptor missiles of Israel's multi-layered air defense. It's much vaunted air defense, Iron Dome, David's Sling. And a lot of these upper altitude, very sophisticated and expensive interceptors were really running out. And this is something that the U.S. can only make. And I read that America's production capacity for these missiles is 100 a year. So, that juxtaposed with the theater potentially in the Pacific, with the theater in Ukraine and Russia, that America can't afford to lose these in this needless war with Iran. So I think, these were among the factors that led to the ceasefire, was Iran's retaliatory capabilities, that it wasn't as weak as some of these countries historically were, that the U.S. has gone to war. It was able to defend itself more kind of strongly. And with the question about Qatar, I think, that is like the highest rung of the escalation for Iran, where America hit Fordo and Iran was trying to signal that if America is going to enter this war, they're going to go after U.S. bases in the region and potentially even, these countries in the Persian Gulf will be destabilized. So yes, the reporting was that Fordo was largely evacuated, and now the intelligence assessments for today are saying that the nuclear material is intact. And there was even one report that said America gave Iran a heads up that Fordo was going to be struck. Similarly, I think Iran was very calibrated and kind of tit for tat. So Iran hit largely evacuated U.S. bases, sent a signal to these Persian Gulf countries that their stability, is on the line. And that's, for America, that creates much greater potential costs in terms of the economic fallout globally, the Strait of Hormuz being closed. These close allies that Trump just went there and signed trillions of dollars of deals with, these are countries that rely on foreign investment. They need stability. So, there's capital flight affects them. This is why the Houthis ultimately prevailed against Saudi Arabia, because they shut down large parts of the Saudi economy for a couple of years. And, Mohammed bin Salman wanted to do this Vision 2030. So Iran, by pressuring the Persian Gulf countries as well, can ultimately, I think the calculus is, it pressures America to kind of back off.
I just want to add that Iran has been under an arms embargo for years. So one of the reasons their sort of defense or entire arms system is unconventional is because they don't have access, the air defense, the fighter jets. That's one of the criticisms now. Internally, they had this deal with the Russians to purchase fighter jets, and they haven't been delivered yet. And this is exactly what you need when you're getting attacked from the sky. So Israeli jets are going into the Iranian sky, bombing, and the Iranians, essentially their defense is shooting missiles into Israel to establish deterrence. And that's why they also had this network of the axis of resistance, one reason is essentially seeing that as forward defense, as having this unconventional sort of ring of fire to establish deterrence to be able to defend themselves unconventionally.
Let's take some more questions from the audience. Do we have questions in the back here? Anyone behind me want to ask a question? Okay, but I'm just going to check the back since they're behind me. All right, we'll go here. We'll go to the lady here.
Mehdi, I actually have a question for you. Is that allowed?
Sure.
Okay. Firstly, I'm also British American like yourself, except I'm born in Iran. My question to you is, as a media person, is a criticism, despite the fact that I love independent media. When this war started, I told all my friends and family, Iran's going to be fine. And they were like, why, Afsaneh? I was like, well, because Iran's not Syria. Why isn't Iran Syria? Because Syria, Iraq, Jordan, these nations are about 100 years old. Previously, they were part of the Ottoman Empire for centuries.
Okay.
Iran has been a consistent nation for 2,500 years. Now, the people who've lived in a place that has been consistently one nation are not going to give it up. It's not complicated. But our media, maybe it's because America is so young, it can't differentiate between who is who.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, why does the media, including the independent media, with all due respect, miss the historical and cultural narratives? Thank you.
So that's a good question. I'm not sure we've missed all those narratives. I do think we have to be careful about all these narratives. I think you're right, without a shadow of a doubt, that a lot of the borders in the Middle East are products of colonialism and the post-war settlement in a way that Iran isn't. I do worry, though, about doing, this is just my personal opinion, I don't know if these guys disagree, but I do worry about leaning the other direction too much, which is essentializing people and saying, well, they're one civilization, they're one nation stretching back centuries. Then you get into this kind of, if you remember when Barack Obama was president and he was asked about the Sunni-Shia split, and he said, these are ancient hatreds. And I worry that that's also an Orientalist trope as well. When you talk about people, like America is a young country, but for example, when we talk about Emmanuel Macron being a useless president of France, or when we talk about French foreign policy being hypocritical, we don't also talk about Napoleon's role in that, right? So I don't think we should always just rush to long historical judgments. At the same time, I think history is vitally important. For me, the fact that Iran is an ancient civilization is actually less relevant than the fact that in 1953, there was an elected prime minister of Iran, and he was toppled by a CIA coup, and then the Shah came back, and then the Ayatollahs came in, and none of that is taught in American schools or American media. And then we say, we start the world in Palestine on October the 7th. We start the world in Iran in 1979. That, for me, is a bigger problem when it comes to history. And I do think context is important. And if you are subscribers to Zateo, you'll know that we focus a lot on context and history and not starting the clock yesterday afternoon. We got time, I think, for a couple more questions very quickly. A lady here stood up very enthusiastically, and lady here's been waiting as well in the top. We'll go to these two.
Thank you. Thanks for this wonderful discussion. Knowing what we've seen, like in Iraq, Libya, and all this, the fake reasoning of regime change and all of that, we know that if it's profitable, it's going to happen. So just from your combined experience, realistically, what do you think will happen? Yes. What is the best case scenario? And what is your vibe say? I know sometimes our president just does things based on a vibe. So what is your best case scenario?
Best case scenario.
And how likely is it? Thanks.
Do you want to pass the mic over this way? So lady here, raise your hand. So we don't, yep.
Thank you. First of all, thanks guys so much for your time today. I actually have two questions. The first one is the timing of the strikes on Iran. I just read today in the Washington Post that Israel had been planning for a year for these attacks. Do you think, in your view, that it came coincidentally when the Syrian regime fell back in December, when Assad's regime fell? Do you think Syria's domestic and regional dynamics have anything to do with that? And then the narratives about Iraq's, the upcoming narratives about when the Iraq War happened, all of the rumors about how WMDs were the reason for Iraq's invasion. Do you think that has anything to do with the narratives being pushed about Iran?
Do you mean the same narrative we're hearing again? What's up?
Yeah, the exactly, like the question, the rumors about how WMDs were used, and how like the nuclear program in Iran is being used as a mechanism.
Well, let's start backwards then. Who wants to take on the WMD question and the Syria question?
I can talk about that. Well, yeah, I've been on mainstream media a lot this past 10 days, and absolutely, I hear the narrative not just from the host, but the other guests. Usually I have to debate someone who's pro-war, pro-attacks, and it's very much a similar debate. These were nuclear weapons program or bombs, or that we have to stop them from imminently building the bomb and the nuclear program, or again, the preemptive strike that the Israelis have been framing their attack as. Yes, very much, I think, sort of reminds that era in the discourse of the pre-Iraq war. As far as the timing of the Israeli attack, I think the Israelis had been planning for something for years, and Benjamin Netanyahu has been trying to push the U.S. into a war with Iran for over 2 decades. But this also, I think this attack was aimed at sabotaging U.S.-Iran diplomacy. So a round of talks were scheduled for Sunday in Oman between Tehran and Washington. This attack came just before that, and the talks were off. So he's been trying to sabotage diplomacy under Obama, the past few months under Trump, and I think they just saw their chance, maybe got a green light or a yellow light from the White House, and they just went for it.
Isn't it amazing that Netanyahu tried to get Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, George Bush, Dick Cheney to bomb Iran, and he got the guy from Home Alone 2 to do it for him? Think about what a world we live in. Sina, best case scenario.
Yeah. So best case scenario, which I think could be connected to this narrative, that the timing was largely because of these ongoing U.S.-Iran negotiations. So, Netanyahu and Israel, their opposition to the nuclear deal under Obama, or their opposition to U.S.-Iran diplomacy, is really rooted in they don't want America to come to terms with Iran and kind of disengage from the region, and where they need America as their main backer to give them unconditional support, because they have all these expansionist projects. They want to take over West Bank, Gaza. So they basically need America in the region. They need this foe in Iran, which it's very interesting, how they pivoted to demonizing Iran in the 1990s, when actually Israel gave covert support to Iran in the 80s during the Iran-Iraq war. It's a very fascinating history. But so this, in terms of the best case scenario, so, there's 2 schools of thought right now. So one is that, Trump, these negotiations with Iran were kind of a ruse. He was playing like 4D chess, strategic misdirection. Meanwhile, green-lighted Israel to attack. The other one is that, no, he was adamant about a deal, to the extent that he's coherent. They were pursuing it. Steve Witkoff had 5 rounds of negotiations, and the attack happens a couple days before the scheduled talks last Sunday in Oman, which many people thought they were going to reach some kind of initial interim deal or kind of principles agreement. So if this latter scenario is true, which I'm inclined to think that, because I don't think Trump and them are capable of playing this kind of big 4D chess, that Trump, Netanyahu kind of steamrolled him. Said, hey, you gave him 60 days. It's day 61. We got this amazing plan. We're going to take out the military leadership. We're going to help you get a deal. That's how they sold it to him. The initial day on Thursday or Friday, when Israel took out all those people, and it seemed like deactivated or through cyber attacks or whatnot, a lot of Iran's missile forces and air defenses were kind of paralyzed for a couple hours. That Trump came out, said it was excellent. He wants to look tough. This is great. This is good. But then he was silent for 2 days after the missiles, Iran's retaliations came. And then as it became evident that this was going to be a quagmire, it seems like, and now this is bearing out, that he was looking for a face-saving way out. He hit this, it seems like, somewhat symbolic strike on the Iranian nuclear facilities. Iran retaliated against Qatar and this U.S. base in Qatar. And Trump announced a ceasefire. And this morning, he was like, cussing out Netanyahu. And so in the best case scenario, which it's good to be optimistic, I could envision a potential scenario where this really showed the limits of a military action against Iran. They did it. none of the strategic aims Netanyahu or America wanted were achieved. Iran's nuclear program is still intact. Its ballistic missile program is intact. The regime is still there. Iran hit back hard. It showed that it can hit back hard. The cost would be immense. And so in this context of America wanting to pivot to Asia, Russia, Canada and Panama, I don't know, all these pressing, these other priorities Trump has in his domestic agenda, that in this optimistic scenario, that Trump, having seen Netanyahu play to him with this new right-wing backlash against Israel, there is a path to, in renewed negotiations, again, what that looks like, what Iran would want. Again, this is an optimistic scenario, but that would be the worst case scenario for Netanyahu, that this was a desperate Hail Mary, that Israel is in a strategic dead end, that it didn't achieve any of its strategic objectives in Gaza. Hezbollah is still there. It's more isolated than ever. It's more dependent on U.S. support than ever. It just hit this kind of wall with Iran. And if America just makes a deal with Iran and kind of pivots out of the Middle East, Israel is left with, in a much more weaker position, I would argue.
I love this idea of Trump playing 4D chess.
I don't think it's happening.
I suspect Trump would struggle with an Etch-a-Sketch, let alone chess, let alone 4D chess. But I did enjoy this cussing out this morning. We are running out of time. That gentleman in the back has been waiting a while. Okay, we got to take a question from the back. And if we have time, I believe the congressman's arriving momentarily. Let's make this the last or penultimate question.
I want you to know that I have a gift sub to Zatea.
Love it.
I want to talk about religion and the way in which the Republican and the Christian right has been groomed for years in the sermonizing of Kufi and that whole megachurch movement to bomb Iran. I mean, this is not new stuff. And the Congress is really in occupied territory. Is there anyone doing independent analysis in the shop now?
Is there anyone doing independent analysis?
In the shop, that's decision-making in this inner circle of the White House?
I mean, the problem with this Trump administration is that it's not just Trump, right? I mean, Trump is a problem, but when people told me to go back to Sina's best-case scenario, I remember Palestinian activists, some telling me that Trump is more likely to do a deal than Biden because he's not Zionist in his core, because he's a transactional guy. And my response always was, but look at the people around him. Even if I were to believe that scenario, he sent Mike Huckabee to Israel, who said, God made you for this moment, Mr. President. He's got Hegseth as defense secretary, Christian nationalist crusader. He's got Marco Rubio, who, like Lindsey Graham, never met a war he didn't support. These are the people around him. And I just worry that those hawks, to go back, I'm going to be to your best case scenario. My worry about the worst case scenario now is that they have legitimized the idea of going to war with Iran regularly. The Israelis talk about mowing the lawn in Gaza, the horrible, dehumanizing phrase they use. We go into Gaza every few years and we kill a bunch of them, and then we come out again. And now there's talk of them doing that to Iran. I don't know how sustainable that is, especially if Iran goes for a nuke, but with US blessing. And that, for me, is a very worrying moment. But you're right, the religious angle, the end times angle, it's no coincidence that the Heritage Foundation project, the guys who did Project 2025, the project they have going after Palestinian activists is called Project Esther. And if you look up in your Bible who Esther fought with, it's very clear how much all of this is seen through biblical lenses, sadly. And we all heard Ted Cruz say that the Bible told him to support Benjamin Netanyahu, which was a very funny moment. We have time. The congressman's wondering. I'm going to take that last member of the audience question. That gentleman's been waiting a while. That gentleman there. All right, you and you. If you're fast, you have to be super fast. No, that gentleman there. That guy there. No, but that guy first. I get it. That guy and that guy. And then we'll wrap. I might lose my voice even with the mic today. Super fast question. Super fast.
Actually, my question is actually for Ro Khanna. And
ask it now and we'll save it.
Okay, ask it now?
Just say it and I'll remember it.
Okay, why hasn't there been any congressional hearings on the Gaza Humanitarian Fund? And for you, Mehdi, why haven't you hired Ayman Boudin to be on your show yet?
Why have I, what did you say?
Ayman Boudin, why haven't you pushed him from MSNBC?
Okay, because he's happy at MSNBC. Let's take this guy here. Last question. Yeah, give it. Send the mic quickly. Go for it. Last question.
I am Egyptian and I'm worried about the Middle East. My question,
Close your mouth.
how is this going to affect the Middle East? And
He's Egyptian and he's worried about the Middle East.
how is this going to affect the Middle East? And how is this going to affect MAGA here in USA? Thank you.
That is a huge question to end on. I think we're going to save that for the congressman asking about MAGA, because the congressman's been doing some work with MAGA on this subject. So we have much to discuss. For now, please give it up for Negar Mortazavi and Sina Tusi. Thank you for the analysis.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Appreciate it. Especially with the heat. Thank you both. And without any further ado, since we're all melting here in the heat, give it up for California Congressman Ro Khanna. Hello, sir. How you doing?
Turnout.
All right. Congressman, thank you for taking time out.
Thank you. I love the turnout.
It's a great turnout in the heat. They all came for you.
They came for the cause.
They came for the cause. Give it up for the cause. I'm just going to jump straight into it.
Good.
You are sponsoring a War Powers resolution with Thomas Massey, Republican congressman, who Donald Trump really doesn't like right now.
Yes.
Your party leader, Hakeem Jeffries, said yesterday,
you want to start with the softballs?
No, no softballs. It's really hot. No softballs. Your leader in the House said, I haven't seen the resolution. I haven't seen Ro Khanna's War Powers Act. Why hasn't he seen your act? Or do you not believe him?
Look, he is now for a War Powers resolution coming on the floor, as is Schumer. But I was on TV.
Jeffries has come out for it? I missed that.
He's come out that there should be a vote on the War Powers resolution. I think the question there now, there are multiple War Powers resolutions. They're basically similar. But he has now said that he does support that we have a War Powers resolution vote on the House. Schumer has said that he supports it in the Senate. But it took me a week on television bashing Schumer before he agreed to have that vote. And I think I find it incomprehensible. Look, there has not been any fissure so far in the MAGA actual base other than this issue. The tariffs, some of the elite business leaders care, but the people who voted for Donald Trump, this is the first issue that ordinary voters feel betrayed. There are about a third of MAGA voters who voted for him because he said, I'm not going to get in any foreign wars, and I'm not going to have your jobs go offshore. That we've had too much focus on jobs going offshore, wars offshore. I'm going to focus on America. And so the most obvious thing for the Democratic Party should have been to stand in unison and say, we are the party of peace. We're the party that's going to be for peace abroad and jobs at home. And we funded it for a week.
But maybe the Democratic Party hasn't done that because it's not the anti-war party or pro-peace party. That's the problem.
But there are large parts of the party that are. And the parts of the party that aren't should be sidelined. I thought they were defeated. Look, I thought after Obama ran in the Iraq War, that anyone who was cheerleading for the Iraq War would be sidelined for the party. And then you see like Brett McGurk is still on CNN. Like who puts
Middle East guy?
Who puts Brett McGurk on television other than to ask him why have you been wrong about every major foreign policy decision for the last 20 years? And they're having a time about what is it, and then he's cheerleading for Trump on Iran. I mean, the reality is that the Democratic Party has to stop being as polite. We don't have to be engaged in a politics of personal insult. We don't have to be engaged in a politics of personal destruction. But we do have to be engaged in a politics of principle, in a politics of conviction. And we can't put civility and manners and being part of the club over a conviction of standing up for peace and calling out policies that have failed in this country, calling out the strikes in Libya, calling out this war in Yemen, calling out the unconstitutional strikes in Iran, calling out the betrayal that NAFTA was to the working class, calling out the betrayal that China's ascension to the World Trade Organization was to the working class. Part of the problem with the Democratic Party is we're too afraid to criticize the status quo because we're too afraid of offending people in our own party who are responsible for the status quo. We're never going to win until we start speaking the truth.
There's a lot there. I have about 17 follow-up questions based on that answer. I do want to talk about MAGA.
Yes.
I have less faith in the MAGA movement than you do. We come back to that in a moment. You mentioned Libya. A lot of Republicans have been getting very upset at your colleague, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, calling for Trump's impeachment because of these unconstitutional strikes. And they are saying, hold on, Democrats. You didn't say anything when Joe Biden was dropping bombs in the Middle East. You didn't say anything when Barack Obama was bombing Libya in 2011 without war powers resolution. What's your response to that line of argument from the right? Obviously, they're being cynical, but there is truth to the cynical argument, is there not?
Well, they're right on the point that Obama's attacks on Libya were not just unconstitutional, but they were counterproductive. I mean, the lesson, Libya, Gaddafi was obviously not a great person, but he voluntarily gave up the nuclear, his nuclear power, and then he got attacked. So the lesson that all countries learned after Libya is if you voluntarily give up your nuclear power, America will still attack you. It was actually the perverse incentive for countries to become more like Pakistan and North Korea. And this idea that you can just go bomb countries, and if we don't put ground troops on, or if we don't stay there for months, that somehow it's not a war, defies common sense. I mean, every headline on the strikes in Iran, even though it was one day, every headline said a U.S. enters war in Iran. And let me tell you, the people in Iran certainly thought it was a war. If someone comes and bombs your cities or bombs the facilities, it's war. And so I believe that, and President Obama is someone I deeply admire. I think he's done a lot of things that are good, and I worked in his administration. But we have to have the ability to say that Libya was wrong, that the Yemen was a mistake to be refueling the Saudi planes. Because if we're not honest, if we're not standing up both to Democratic and Republican presidents and recognizing that this issue, there are other issues that are Trump issues, but this issue of executive overreach is a issue that predates Donald Trump. It's an issue of Congress's abrogation of war powers, and we need to call it out intellectually in a consistent way to have credibility with the American people.
Why do you think it is? Why do you think it is? And I just go back to what you said earlier about the party and sidelining voices. The majority of Democrats who I saw react to the attack on Iran, their reaction was, why didn't he have a vote on it first? It wasn't the attack is bad, illegal, wrong, perverse incentive, counterproductive. It was process. Why didn't he come talk to the committee chairs? Why didn't he hold a vote? It does suggest that actually most Democrats would be fine with what Trump's doing if he just followed the rules a bit more.
Well, you know, the biggest outrage that members of Congress have now is we weren't briefed. You know, as if the average American's like, yeah, the problem is they didn't brief Congress. I mean, I think sometimes we're in a delusion. Most people have no faith in Congress. It's like it's an important constitutional argument. It's the least compelling argument to the American public. The argument the average person cares about is not that a Congress that's at 15% approval didn't get a heads up war and didn't get deputy undersecretaries to brief us about something that we could just read in the New York Times anyway. The argument they care about is why do they keep electing people saying that we shouldn't be in overseas wars? They get elected and then they get talked into these wars by a neocon foreign policy blob. And the American people are sick of that. Now, what's changed is, okay, now maybe it's only a one-day war and not a 5-year war because the presidents are getting to realize that the American people are upset. But that's the frustration. They don't want to.
Do you think it's over? Do you think it's over?
Well, I don't know. I would be, I hope for the sake of the world and for the sake of the country that the ceasefire sticks. But there are always unintended consequences. And this is another thing. I mean, it always feels good the day off, mission accomplished. But then the American people bear the consequences for years after. We don't know what this is going to mean in terms of the troops that we're now going to need in the Middle East. We don't know in terms of what it's going to mean in terms of the additional costs. We don't know if Iran at some point takes retaliatory action and the additional risk that it's putting us at. We don't know now if Iran is going to go covert in its nuclear development. if it actually delays the process of getting inspectors there. And we don't know even what damage was done yet in terms of the intelligence. The reports from the administration itself are conflicting. And you know what? It matters. It matters that we're creating a generation of hate. I made this point. I get all my X feed is, well, they already hate us. Well, the regime may hate us, but the people in Iran don't hate us. And it's like we're oblivious to the history, oblivious to the overthrow of Mossadegh, oblivious to the mistakes we made. The nuclear deal in the JCPOA was not just about restricting Iran's nuclear ambitions, which I agree with. I don't believe Iran should get a nuclear bomb. It was also a fundamental reset of the relationship with Iran in the Middle East so that we can actually work towards peace. And that should be the democratic philosophy. We should be for actual engagement and peace abroad.
Well, just, it's funny, a few minutes before you arrived when I was talking to our panelists, I mentioned 1953 and Mohammad Mossadegh. I wonder how many of your colleagues in Congress know who Mohammad Mossadegh is?
Well, I don't know, but you know why?
There's a lack of knowledge of history, of geography, of culture, of religion.
There's a lack of knowledge, and you can say, you know, that you should only know so many things. But when you're exercising power, and you're exercising power that fundamentally impacts the lives and destiny of millions of people, then you have a responsibility to understand those people and what the impacts are. If you don't want to exercise the power, that's different. My sensitivity comes at it because, of course, and my grandfather, it's not just a talking point. I mean, he spent years in jail as part of India's independence movement. If it weren't for the United States pushing Churchill, you would not have had decolonization. And so the understanding of the overthrow of Mossadegh has to be an understanding of the British aspiration to nationalize Iranian oils because of colonial aspect. That's just the truth. And if you don't understand it, how are you going to move beyond it? And that's what people never understood about what Obama was trying to do. It was not just to deny Iran, it was to try to rewrite history in a way that we can imagine a better world. That used to be America, that used to be John F. Kennedy, that used to be FDR at his best. We need a Democratic Party that is there to inspire. And by the way, that's the difference between the MAGA isolationists and our party. They're simply saying no more foreign wars so we can develop America at home. And there's truth and power to that. But we have to take it one step further. We have to say a multiracial America will stand for justice in the world. It's not a disengagement. It's that we're seeking to build a better world where we allow for the fair self-determination of people and respect their human rights.
One of the points Negar Mortazavi made before you arrived was that a lot of this strike by Israel on Iran prior to the American attack was to blow up negotiations in Muscat, Oman. They were supposed to take place on Sunday. Israel attacked on Thursday. That was a big part of the calculation, they saw a successful negotiation and Netanyahu wanted to blow it up, separate to his long-standing goal to attack Iran. And then when it happened, you then have groups like AIPAC pushing Israeli talking points on Capitol Hill. I know a lot of people here are online. You're very online. You saw a lot of Congress members all saying the same thing, right? Copy and paste talking points. Now,
let me just say this. There's this meme called the Ro Khanna cycle. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. It basically says, Ro, say one thing someday, and then say something that I disagree with. Let me say this. I'd rather have a Ro Khanna cycle of original thought than other unoriginal talking points, which is why the vast majority of Congress is these days. How about having some independence? How about having some...
On that note, Thomas Massey has earned the ire of the pro-Israel lobby and Donald Trump, because he's not just criticized Trump, but he's also criticized his colleagues for having AIPAC handlers and buddies, which I think he said on the Tucker Carlson show. He's talking about the Republicans. What about you and your Democratic colleagues? When I see so many of them saying word for word the same thing, that came from a talking point. That came from a draft paper that went round. They didn't all just magically have exactly the same words and sentences line up in their tweets. How much influence do pro-Israel lobbying groups have on your Democratic colleagues in Congress at times like this?
Look, it's undeniable that they have too much influence, and I have, with Summer Lee, a bill to ban all super PACs. And the reason I say all super PACs, and by the way, it would be constitutional under Citizens United. Think about it in a very simple way. A politician, a person cannot give a politician more than $3,500 in a contribution, right? You can't give it, no one can give someone more than $3,500. And yet that same person can go and write $250 million to a super PAC. How can you restrict contributions to politicians under Buckley versus Valeo, under this Supreme Court? That's constitutional because it creates an appearance of corruption, but somehow you can't restrict the money to super PACs, which create even more of an appearance of corruption. So Summer Lee and I have a bill that says you don't even have to overturn Citizens United to ban super PACs. Make sure no one can give super PACs more than they can give a politician. And that would end it. That is the real problem. And my view on this is, look, the problem is deeper because you can't have viewpoint discrimination in who can spend on a super PAC. Eliminate all of it.
Before we go to the audience, a lot of people got a lot of questions for you, I'm sure. Just a couple more questions from me. One is about MAGA. You mentioned about the division in the base. You and I have talked before about this. I'm a little bit more cynical than you are. I look at the polling from last week, where 60% of Trump supporters said, we don't want to bomb Iran. 60% I think it was. Let me turn around. 25% said they wanted to bomb Iran last week. This week, after he did it, 60% are totally loving it. It is a cult. How much can you make a dent into that cult, do you think, as a Democratic Party politician reaching across the aisle?
Look, obviously, people who voted for Trump, many of them are going to give him the benefit of the doubt. They're going to buy his rhetoric saying, oh, I didn't want a forever war, I got out of it. I mean, and this is classic Trump. He'll give something to the folks who really wanted to hit Iran. By the way, they're not happy because many of them wanted a regime change. And then he'll say, no, I'm really with the anti-war base. And a number of people will give him the benefit of the doubt. But the point is, even if it's 60%, if it's 25% of the MAGA base that is opposed to these wars, firmly so, disapproving even of Trump, and it's probably 40% that doesn't like it, but because it's Donald Trump is giving him a pass. I mean, that's a huge alley that the Democratic Party can drive through. Imagine if we just picked up 10% of the Donald Trump base. And yet our party's messaging has been all over the place over the last week and a half. You don't know whether we're the party opposed to these wars. And
Chuck Schumer did that Taco Trump, let's be tougher on Iran video.
Well, he was criticizing Trump because he thought that Trump shouldn't be doing the deal.
Do you think this will be an issue in the 2028 presidential race in the way that Iraq came back to haunt Hillary Clinton and help Barack Obama? Do you think in the 28 race, Gaza and Iran will play a role in terms of, will foreign policy tends not to, will it?
I think it'll play a role in 2026. We're going to see a number of candidates running for the House, for the Senate, on a platform to keep us out of wars, on a platform of saying that they want to stop the bombing in Gaza. And I certainly think it will play a role in 2028 because it implicates two fundamental principles. Do you believe that we shouldn't have over $1 trillion of our budget going into a Pentagon that is committed to overseas wars? You can't have a robust domestic agenda and still support all of this spending. So if you care about investing at home and care about communities at home, you can't be overextended on the military and these wars abroad. And secondly, it talks about our commitment fundamentally to human dignity, to human rights, to the equality of people. And that's a value that a lot of Democratic voters care about.
Will the anti-war candidate in 2028 be you?
I hope it's more than me. I hope it would be a sad state of affairs if I'm the only person on the stage being anti-war. But I will say this, and this is not...
You are running.
Well, who knows?
Sounded like you were.
You said it was a hypothetical.
I didn't say anything about a hypothetical.
But let me say this, which is not a knock on any particular candidate. You know, I have been disappointed that our leading voices of the party have not been more vocal on this issue. They're so afraid. So many of them are, okay, I just don't want to take a position. It's a foreign policy issue. This is not complex foreign policy. This is about whether you believe that the last 25 years of a foreign policy blob that has taken us to war is wrong, and whether you're going to recommit the Democratic Party to being the party of peace abroad. It's a fundamental issue. And by the way, it's the issue, arguably, that the president has the most say over, unlike domestic policy, which the Congress and the Senate does.
True. Well said. Okay, let's take some questions from the audience. They've been waiting in the heat for a while. Let's start with, I see Mehdi, but I'm going to come to you in a bit. I'm going to come to you in a bit. Let's go back. Let's take the gentleman here in the blue shirt.
Hey, thank you for everything you're saying, but as a lifelong Democrat, I am so frustrated with the party. Even at the micro level, where we have someone running in New York and all the base money is going to Como. And like, I don't understand why your party doesn't see what our base wants. We want change. And I'm not seeing that with the establishment Democrats. When is that going to change?
Well, there's voting still going on in New York tonight as the polls close, no? Have you endorsed Zoran Ramdani?
I haven't gotten over. I'd like him to win, but
Okay.
I certainly don't support the 20 million against him. But to your point, look, one way of looking at it is $20 million are coming out against him. What's changing? The other way of looking at it is this guy started at 1% in the polls, a South Asian of Muslim faith in New York City, where it had 9/11, and he is neck and neck with Mario Cuomo's son, and is possibly going to win despite $20 million. Now, there are two avenues for the progressives. We can either say the whole thing is rigged, give up, and just disengage from politics, in which case you're basically handing over the government to the interests that are going to continue the forever wars and are going to abandon the working and middle class. Or you could say it is a fight, and we're going with Bernie Sanders came pretty close, and Mamdani is taking it to the next level, and we're going to organize, and eventually we're going to take over the Democratic Party and have a progressive vision. And I'll tell you something: the odds for us are much, much easier than the odds my grandfather had to overcome British colonialism, or the odds that people had in the civil rights movement to overcome segregation. So I think what is constructive is critique, but then get involved, not critique and become disillusioned and cynical, because that's not going to bring change.
Okay, let's take a lot of hands up. I'm going to take 3 questions at a time. We'll take lady here, then we'll take Mehdi, and then we'll take gentleman there.
Hi, I'm a graduate student at GW, and I just saw you 3 hours ago. So my question, and I didn't get a chance to ask you. My question is, when are the Democrats going to stop? When are they going to stop beating the bush? Is it beating around the bush with the P word, aka Palestine? This is something that we have. I feel like you guys have slightly touched on before, but we didn't really hear anything about that. So the Dems.
Okay. Great question. Hold on, we're going to take 3 at a time. Media's right there. Let's let Media do it.
2 questions.
One, Media.
Yeah, no, I got to do 2. One is, do you support cutting off U.S. money to the endless war in Ukraine? And now we have 2 War Powers Act. Yours that was good, but your co-sponsor, Tom Massey, said he's not going forward. And a lousy one introduced by the pro-Israel Democrats that has a carve-out that makes it useless. So what do we do about that?
Okay, and then gentleman there in the black shirt. Yeah.
I'm going to do the Medea precedent here. I'm very glad that you're moving forward with Massey on war powers, or trying to. However, I'm disenchanted to learn, correct me if I'm wrong, that you voted against impeachment today. Al Green put forward a resolution trying to impeach Trump for his unconstitutional, as you call it, attack on Iran. If it's unconstitutional, aren't you obliged to move to impeachment?
Okay.
Constitutional scholars, Bruce Fein, Ralph Nader, would say that it's on you to do that. And if I could, second, and you like the second one, Mehdi. You've been very articulate in talking about Israel's nukes.
You're Sam Husseini, right?
I am Sam Husseini. Good, thank you. You've
Nice
been very
to meet you.
articulate, Mehdi, to your credit, on talking about Israel's nukes. The U.S. government, and you, Congressman, invoked the name of John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy attempted in the summer before his assassination to stop Israel from getting nukes, and there's a substantial case that Israel has used its capacity to have nukes to effectively and blackmail the United States. You need to bail us out of any crazy genocide.
Just a question, Sam.
Will you acknowledge Israel's nukes, and will you go to town on this? The U.S. government still will not acknowledge U.S. nukes. Most congressmen are getting their cues from the State Department and refusing to acknowledge that Israel has nuclear weapons. It's absurd.
Let's take them backwards.
Israel has nukes. I'll try to answer all of them. You'll keep me honest.
Yep, Israel nukes.
Okay, obviously Israel has nuclear power and nukes. I didn't even think that's a controversial statement. So, I didn't know that nuclear weapons. I mean, obviously they have them. I mean, they've admitted it, or
Well, they haven't admitted it.
Well, they should admit it. I mean, I think that's a common sense statement. I don't think that's a very controversial statement. I'm surprised if other members of Congress aren't saying it, but that's an obvious one. On impeachment, look, I have deep admiration for President Obama. I think his action in Libya was unconstitutional. I think Biden's actions in striking without coming to Congress the Houthi ships in the Red Sea was unconstitutional. I spoke out about both of those issues. But impeachment, in my view, is a pragmatic decision. It's not simply a decision if someone commits an unconstitutional act. And I don't think right now is the time for us to be able to build the anti-war coalition and to be able to build a majority in 26 and 28 for us to advance that. But it's not that I don't think that his action was unconstitutional on Iran.
Okay, and then Mehdi's question on Ukraine funding.
So I think it's important in my view, and some people may disagree, for us to distinguish between wars of self-defense and wars of choice. I am not a pacifist. I think there are certain wars that are justified. When someone comes in and takes your territory, then standing up for your territorial sovereignty, I think, is justified. If Iran had come and taken part of America, or if Iran had come into Israel and taken part of Israel, and Israel was defending itself, that would be, in my view, justified. But what is unjustified, in my view, is a war of choice unless all avenues have been exhausted and unless there's a real rationale. And in this case, that hasn't been the case for Iran. Diplomacy would have been much better to deny him the bomb. But so I have supported Ukraine while calling for diplomacy at the same time. I was one of the only person on this congressional progressive letter back in 2022. I signed a letter saying that, yes, I support Ukraine aid, but we should have talks with Russia at the same time to try to come to a just peace. And I was excoriated in the press. They said my political career was over simply for saying that we should have diplomacy at the same time. And that remains my position. We should support Ukraine for a just peace, but at the same time engage in these talks.
And Mehdi's other question was about, is the War Powers Resolution dead now with Thomas Massey playing out? What about the other one?
So the War Powers Resolution, Massey has not pulled out. That the legislation is still ripening, meaning it's going to get a vote in the middle of July. Please, if you know people and members of Congress, encourage them to co-sponsor it. By the way, it's not even Massey's call whether that gets a vote or not. Any member of Congress, once that ripens, can call for a vote on that War Powers Resolution. My view is that the other War Powers Resolution is fine. The more Democrats that get on it, they want clarifying language that this will not prevent the United States from shooting down any missile that Iran may launch on Israel. Tim Kaine already has that clarifying language. We can get that clarifying language if we get a vote. I don't think at this point the important thing is to actually get a vote on the War Powers Resolution and have the caucus pushing in that direction.
And the lady's question about your party beating around the bush, which is a very polite way of putting it. Polite way of putting complicity in a genocide. On Palestine, right now, we are witnessing daily massacres in Gaza, like hundreds and hundreds of people killed in recent weeks at these so-called aid sites. Literally, people being invited to get aid and then shot at. The kind of thing the Serbs did in the mid-1990s. This is kind of barbarism, right? Depravity. We're not seeing Democrats reacting, even those who have said, Israel needs to have its aid conditioned and all of that stuff. but the sheer level of evil we are seeing in Gaza right now, that's not reflected in Congress amongst the vast majority of your party.
Well, I was just, I was just on Theo Vaughn. He's a independent conservative podcaster, and we had a whole conversation, by the way, on Gaza, and we talked specifically about the facts. 55,000 people killed, most women and children, 130,000 people who have been injured, 400,000 people who are facing starvation. The fact that Trump, since he came into office and said that he was going to end the Gaza war, has authorized $14 billion of sales, including the 2,000-pound bomb. And we see that when Trump says to Netanyahu, stop the bombing in Iran, Netanyahu stops. So my question is, why can't he say stop the... He didn't judge. Well, Biden was wrong.
But why? Why? We all know he was wrong. Why?
Well, I think, first of all, Biden was first elected in 1972. So, I mean, he came of age at a different time. But I believe that I mean, I don't know why else. I mean, he was a...
Okay, what about Kamala Harris?
Well, I criticized her stance on this. I had voted, of course, against the funding for an offensive war to Netanyahu. As one of 45, 50 members who did, I said that a Palestinian speaker should speak at the DNC. I said that she should be very, very clear that she's not going to continue to provide a blank check to Netanyahu. And in return, she didn't say what Trump is saying. He was going to end the war. And Trump obviously lost Wisconsin. Pennsylvania is different. We had other reasons, but I think we would have won both Wisconsin and Michigan if she had just taken a clearer position. And one of the loudest applause lines she got was Palestinian self-determination. And I believe the United States can be involved. I know some people here may disagree with me on the two states, but I believe you can recognize a Palestinian state without Hamas, with Palestinian civil society and Jordan and Saudi and others involved in the Arab peace plan. Currently, the United States, by the way, cannot even recognize a Palestinian state. If we recognize the Palestinian state at the UN, the law says, the 1991 law says that the UN, the funding to the UN would be cut off. So we need to, and I've called for saying that law is wrong and that the United States should recognize a Palestinian state and Palestinian self-determination, and then we can work towards that to be one that recognizes.
Do you think, just to cut to the core of the question again, which is, we appreciate your views, but trying to get a sense of why don't others hold them? How much of it is just to do with racism? We talk about Republican Party MAGA racism, but a lot of white liberals on Congress just don't see Palestinians as human beings, do they?
Well, I think it has to do more with a lack of understanding.
No, come on, that's a cop-out.
Well,
John Fetterman,
yeah.
Do you think gives a shit about Palestine?
I think that Fetterman needs to understand the history better. I mean, I think that's look, I believe in that most Americans are people like Theo Vaughn. They have decent instincts. They're good human beings. They don't like bullying. They don't like people being.
We can agree on that, but Congress doesn't reflect those views.
But I think they don't see the humanity of something. You have to understand the history. You have to understand the people, and there has to be also, of course, political incentive. And it used to be that being for seeing the humanity of the Palestinian people was a simple loser in American politics. Now that political calculus is changing, and with that, my hope is that we will have a more balanced politics.
All right, we're going to take 3 more questions. Lady here, gentleman here, and lady at the back.
Hi. So today I have to talk about my friend Osama. He was killed 2 days ago at one of the aid sites.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, we have a group of people. We support a lot of people in Gaza. We're raising thousands of dollars all the time just to get these people fed, because right now a 25 kilogram thing of flour is $380, and that's the people that have phones, that have Instagram, that can reach out to people like me, and there are people that are in much worse situations. So I don't have questions. I need you to act. You're elected, and I need everybody in Congress to act. We need to stop the GHF. If people don't think that the U.S.'s international criminal responsibility has already been engaged, it is by being part of the GHF. And we also need to get food in. I see my friends. They are wasting away, and they are better off in Gaza. We need food inside. We need the GHF out.
And on that note, I've just reminded, I don't know if he's gone or not, but there was a gentleman who had a question for you. He walked in, which was linked to that, which is, why aren't members of Congress holding hearings on this absurd GHF where people are being massacred every day? Gentleman here.
Congressman, I want to push you more about Palestine. I think your response on the issue of Palestine only proves the lady's point about the Democratic Party pussyfooting and beating around the bush on Palestine. Talking about the two-state solution when there's a genocide going on is the ultimate hypocrisy, and I don't mean to make it an attack on you. You said that you believe in defensive wars. You said that you are not a pacifist. Would you right now support the Palestinian right to resist against the occupation and condemn Israel right now for the genocide of the Palestinian people in front of all these people?
Oh, sorry, we were taking one at the back. Yes, there. Sorry. Third one.
Hi, Congressman Ro Khanna. We've met before. You probably don't recognize me, but I met you probably a year and a half ago with a bunch of other influencers, I think through Brianna Wu. And I'm kind of small in comparison to everybody, but I guess I've really always respected you because I respect your ability to go into spaces that are adversarial towards you, whether they're super left-wing or super right-wing. And I really appreciate that. And I think what I would like to say is I think that there is a lack of empathy and understanding on both sides of the aisle when it comes to even the Israel-Palestine issue. As somebody who I've been pretty pro-Palestine my entire life, I do not support any violent resistance, if that's what we're asking, right? What the previous person was asking. I don't support violent resistance. I'm not okay with that. But am I okay with what's happening in Gaza right now? No, absolutely not. And I think that until we recognize that there is a shared trauma between two people, there is a shared pain and a shared history, that it will be impossible to get people to see Palestinians as human beings deserving of empathy, of livelihood, of self-determination, and it just yeah.
Can I ask for a question?
Yeah, sorry. So my question would be, like, what would you recommend to the average person who you think is boxed in to like their circle of people who believe the same things as them? How can they branch out and things like that?
But do I start answering?
Yeah, take them in any order you want.
Well, look, I appreciate very much your perspective, and I do think ultimately, and people may disagree with me, that you have two people which have a powerful story and claims, and that we have to understand with empathy and understand have a just solution. And with respect, sir, I disagree on the violent resistance. I mean, that was Hamas. I mean, that was the attack on October 7th. That was the justification. But I condemn that, and I condemn that as a person. I don't think that's what's going. I just respectfully disagree. I think what is going to bring peace in that region is a recognition of the Israeli state to be secure, and a working with the Palestinian civil authority, civil society, Jordan, UAE, and the United States, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the United States governance in Palestine. I think that is, and the American government and a state, I mean, and a Palestinian state. And I think the American president and Americans have to be involved in that process. And by the way, I think a lot of it can be solved through land swaps, through the adjudication of Jerusalem. I don't think. Now that
in the immediate, though, we do need to get the food in. We need to make sure
that people aren't just pushed all the way down to southern Gaza, that we want.
Why isn't more being done about this quote-unquote Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is the site of multiple massacres on a daily basis?
But we should look into that. I've supported UNRWA. You know, I voted. I have been unequivocal. In fact, I voted against one of the budgets because they denied UNRWA funding last year. And I've been unequivocal that UNRWA has the know-how and the network to get the aid in. And I'm happy to call for hearings about what is happening there. And I'm so sorry for the loss of your friend. And it's deeply tragic, and we need to figure out how at first we can stop the bombing. Secondly, how we can stop the pushing of the Gazan people to the southernmost part of Gaza, and how we can get the IDF to be out of Gaza. And then before we can talk about the peace that we want to bring. But do I have any other questions before I get closing remarks?
We got time for, let's take one more. They're asking, and Mehdi asked the same question. Are you going to send Rashida Tlaib's letter?
The letter.
If you can sign Rashida.
I haven't seen the letter. What does it?
All right. Now, take the mic. Last comment. We're out of time, and I do want the Congressman to give the closing remarks.
My name is Haifa, and I'm an American Palestinian, and I am really, really sick and tired of this kind of rhetoric. You don't understand that 2 million Palestinians are at risk of starvation, and you need to do something about it. Your party needs to do something about it. It's going to be blood on your hands, and we will make sure that the Democratic Party will lose again if you once again ignore the Palestinians. If you don't solve the Palestinian problem, the world will never be the same. So you better figure it out.
I appreciate that. Hold on. Can you give him back the mic? Give him back the mic. You didn't actually, I appreciate and I share your rhetoric, but you didn't say the practical thing. What do you want him to do? You said a letter. Everyone didn't hear you. Please tell it.
Medea knows more about it, but we gave it to your office today. We went to your office.
You got a letter today from anti-war activists for you to sign.
I'm happy to read the letter.
It's the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. It's about them, and we want the money to be funded through UNRWA so that they can distribute the food. 4 food sites are in Gaza. When it was under UNRWA, it was over 400. So you think that that's okay as a Democrat?
Hold on. To be fair, the Congressman just said he supports UNRWA funding and prefers UNRWA.
But it needs to happen immediately. 2 million people.
Okay, people are dying every day.
And my sister has an adopted son that was killed as well. He was in the tent during the ceasefire, mind you. Nothing is being said. And Hamas, I'm sick and tired of you talking about Hamas that way. That's all we've got. That's the resisting group, and you've got to wrap your head around it.
I hear the hurt in your voice. I hear the anger, and I hear what's going on. I would just say, just factually, I not only did I vote against the offensive weapon aid to Netanyahu, I was one of maybe 40 Democrats who did that. I also consistently have voted for UNRWA funding and have voted against budgets that don't have the UNRWA funding. So I look at the letter, but I've already cast a lot of votes on UNRWA funding. The problem is it's not the Democrats. Maybe this letter just says, if it says let's fund UNRWA, I mean, I'm on record saying that, so it would be signing what I've already, if that's what it says, voted for. But I think that the question is how do we move forward, and how do we build a coalition that brings change in American foreign policy? And I'm going to be very, very candid with you. There are going to be things that I do that people in this room may not agree with. There are going to be positions that I have that are not the same as people in this room. For example, I believe in an Israeli state, and I believe that we need a two-state solution. Obviously, there are people who don't believe it. I believe that The Hamas terrorist attack was horrific on October 7th, and I think we need a Palestine without Hamas. These are positions I have. But as you look at my record of having opposed the war in Libya, having run the first anti-Iraq war primary in 2003 against Tom Lantos when no one was speaking out against the Iraq war, having read with Bernie Sanders the War Powers Resolution of Yemen, having led with Thomas Massey the War Powers Resolution against the war in Iran, having called very explicitly for Palestinian self-determination in the U.S. to recognize Palestine and say that we should not be funding Netanyahu's war and voting against that and standing up to a lot of interest groups in doing that. And a commitment that comes from a fundamental belief that a multiracial America should be an America for human rights and peace. I would just submit to you this, that we have two choices in American politics. I am all for your choosing and being for the people who support you the most. But ultimately, until we have someone like a Sanders or someone similar to a Sanders win the presidency and not appoint the same people to the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor and having Brett McGurk having a permanent office in the Oval Office, we are going to continually be from the outside. And all I ask is to look into a people's heart and see, do you think they will bend the world further towards justice or not? And to have that level of understanding and pragmatism of the coalition we need to build to bring change. But the one thing I will say to you is whether I go to a Jewish American group or whether I come to a group here, I will always tell you what I actually believe and not pander. And it's certainly in a far more progressive direction and an anti-war direction than the establishment of this party has been for the last 40 years.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you for your patience. I do want to say one thing. There aren't many Democrats who would have agreed at short notice to come and speak to us all tonight about Iran. So I do want to thank Congressman Khanna for taking my questions and your questions. And it wouldn't be a Busboys event without some great heckles. So I appreciate you all for coming tonight, dealing with the heat, enjoying Andy's wonderful food. Give it up for Andy Shalal for giving us the space and Busboys to have these conversations. And if you're not a paid subscriber to Zateo, I will never forgive you at the end of tonight. Please do support independent journalism so we can help move this country in an anti-war direction. Thank you all for your time tonight. I appreciate you all.
Ro Khanna.